Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do it too. And when I say, and on this program, when we say go green, we mean that in a few different ways. The first and most important way is go green, as in deep ecology, not merely conservationism, not merely environmentalism, but instead an acknowledgement and recognition of the interrelationship between all of life itself. That life is an interconnected web. Whatever we do to that web, we ultimately do to ourselves. And whether you come to that conclusion through hard science, or you come to that conclusion through an eco-spiritual indigenous perspective, or like me, you say both of those are pathways to truth and understanding, I will assert with conviction we are all connected in life. And our commitment to being green is a commitment to a level of deep ecological connectedness and balance. The second way I and we, me go green is Green Party. I am a proud and unapologetic Green Party member. Many of you know I had the honor to manage Ralph Nader's campaign for president in 2000 in the state of Texas. In 2004, I was the Green Party nominee for president. 2016, I managed the Jill Stein Ajamu Baraka campaign. I don't turn this podcast / video blog / Substack writing into a promotion of the Green Party, but I do make it a point to say clearly and unequivocally my belief that we need political independence from both the Democrats and Republicans, that when it comes to elections and electoral politics, the neoliberal Democrats and the corporate Republicans are both basically doing the work of and taking their marching orders from the huge transnational corporations and banks. So I believe that we need independent politics. Having said that, I work with people regardless of party affiliation, regardless of whether they vote or not, because here at Redneck Gone Green, really what we're about is lifting up the voices of people who are doing important work within a ideological mindset. And it is with that it is my pleasure to bring to the stage JT. JT is somebody who I recently met through Lisa Hubbard, a colleague and, dare I say, comrade of mine with the New Economy Coalition. She's also very active with the Oregon New Economy Project. And JT has come to my attention as a fantastic individual who's putting the principles and values that we talk about here on Redneck Gone Green into real practice. So with that, I want to welcome JT. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green.
Thank you, David. Glad to be here.
So JT, what I didn't do was give your kind of bio because I think you've got such an interesting one. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. And by that, I mean, I'm going to ask the broad, open-ended question to say, tell us who you are and why it is that you do what you do.
Yeah, that can be a kind of a long story, but I'm going to try to summarize it as much as I can. First of all, I'm a Chinese immigrant. I grew up in China, in Shanghai, China, until I was 15. And then I moved to South Carolina, United States at around, this is 1999. And pretty much like moved away from South Carolina after 3 years in high school and went to college in UC Santa Barbara. I majored in physics. That was something that I'm very, very much interested in from early childhood. And at some point, I think this was sophomore year in college, I learned about housing cooperative and specifically student housing cooperative. And through that, because one of my friends was staying at one of these housing cooperative, I just asked them, "What is this about?" And what they told me is, like, it's just this group of people that democratically own the house and govern the house and runs the house, and, that makes it that the rent is a lot cheaper, and they also throw big parties. So, a college kid, I was like, "Okay, cheap rent, big parties, I'm sold." So, that's kinda like how I got into the co-op world in
So,
general.
JT, I'm going to stop you for a moment and ask, where did you go to school where you came up against the housing cooperative model?
Yeah, this is University of California at Santa Barbara.
Got it. So UC Santa Barbara, of course, just so that folks know, actually has a very active left-leaning political economy. There is I know many of the professors there. You may actually know some of them. I'm thinking that you also bumped up not just about housing cooperatives, but in the course of your studies, the idea of solidarity economy and something beyond just housing co-ops must have come across your path at that time.
You know, what's interesting is, like, I didn't actually get radicalized through the university. I got radicalized through the co-op, through the housing co-op. My first house was BCO, which was one of the house of the student housing co-op in Santa Barbara. And pretty much after the first year, and this was 2002 or 3, I think this is 2003 or 4, we because of the, start of the Iraq war, we immediately mobilized as a house and became basically the hub of organizing protests, direct actions against the Iraq war, uh, at around 2004. And that's kind of how I got radicalized in terms of like politics, but also, through, living in the cooperatives, and understanding how to work horizontally and collaboratively and democratically. That also radicalized me in a different way in terms of just how to organize myself. And I was also just having a great time. So pretty much after the first year, I made basically a lifelong goal is that I want to create as many co-ops, whether it's housing co-ops or worker co-ops as possible throughout my life.
You know, this is fantastic, JT. One of the things that I love is the fact that you have such clarity that you like that, first of all, that you got radicalized, right? And one of the things I like to remind folks is that the word radical at its root just means to the root, which is literally, like a radish, right? To the root
Mhm,
of it. So to get radicalized means to get to a root understanding. And
mhm.
so uh, to me, I got radicalized through the anti-apartheid movement as a student activist at the University of Houston. Back in the late '80s, mid to late '80s. But for you, you have real clarity, JT, that having the lived experience of horizontal cooperative decision making was the path to radicalization. And I
Yes.
want to explore that and ask, was there a political curriculum that went along with that, or was it literally just in your body figuring out that sharing and caring and cooperating made you come alive?
Yeah, I mean, I even remember when I was that age, I was definitely more moderate, center leaning at the time. And some of my friends in the cooperatives, and also just my close friends in general, just happened to be more progressive and more radical. And through living in the cooperatives and learning the actual mechanisms of organizing, whether as a house or through our direct action anti-war movement, or organizing, that embodied experience is what I actually think truly, uh, something that kind of stayed with me. I think it's something that's personally, I think it's more valuable than, discourses and literatures and whatnot. And really feel like this is something that everybody should really experience at some point. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of such experience. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to start more co-ops so that more
You
people
know,
can experience this.
exactly. And, it's so interesting to me because I tell people all the time, because I'll tell this little anecdote, JT. Back in 1999, I was very active in the global justice movement. I helped to organize a bunch of buses to get to Seattle, November of 1999, and the protest against the World Trade Organization. For those who may not remember, this was, the global justice movement was on the
Hmm.
move. The Green Party was growing. The movement was really growing, and there was a lot of awareness that the neoliberal approach to a political economy was failing people. Environmental laws were getting stripped back. Worker and safety laws were getting stripped back, and there was a real fight for how we were going to structure society. In the global justice movement, we said we have a different vision for the world. The point is, the World Trade Organization was convening in Seattle in November of 1999. So I like to say about me and 50,000 of my closest friends all descended there. And, it was a big mass protest, right?
Hmm.
But here's the thing, JT, that I have many times in my life chanted, whose streets? Our streets. Whose
Hmm.
streets? Our streets. In November of 1999 was the first time in my life I was chanting, whose streets? Our streets. Whose streets? Our streets. Whose streets? And I looked around and I was like, oh, these really are our streets. And
Hmm.
there was puppets, and there was music, and there was dancing, and people were crying, and there were people in turtle costumes marching right alongside steel workers in hard hats. It was a carnivalesque atmosphere, even as we were getting tear gassed later. Like, and I tell
Hmm.
people, if you get an actual taste of liberation, if you get an actual taste of what it means to be fully human with other people, really struggling to figure out how to best be the best version of yourself, you will get hungry for that feeling. You will
Hmm.
want to feel it again, because that's authentic living, to feel what it's like to be a fully empowered, embodied human being. And it feels great.
Yeah, I totally agree. I still remember the first time that I truly embodied the feeling of solidarity, at a one of the direct action. It was nothing. It's like nothing else. Like there's no. It's a unique feeling that human can feel. That's not like any other feeling. And unfortunately, it's missing in a lot of our current society just because how the current society is structured, right?
Uh, hey JT, sorry about that. Looks like
It's okay.
we've lost David. Um, Not exactly sure what's going on. Um, if you wouldn't mind, maybe we can just have you um take a look at the questions that we have for you. Maybe
Yeah.
we can go through that.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
So yeah. Um, I mean, I know that I know that one of the things that I'm certainly curious about is, if you can talk, maybe if you can speak to what your experience working, how your experience working in your co-op compares to experiences that you've had outside of the co-op um, environment, and what that looks like.
Yeah, so just kind of quickly introduce, the worker-owned co-op that I'm a part of. So SymbiOp, SYMBIOP, which stands for Symbiosis Cooperative, is a worker-owned co-op that myself and with a few friends started around March 2020, as a way to kind of provide a job for a lot of people that we know that got laid off. And that experience was certainly transformative for me and for a lot of people, and I learned a lot of things. But to kind of answer your question, working at Symbiop, um, in some way it's not too different from other jobs because I don't like to paint this picture of like cooperative as some sort of utopian place where people will just be happy and have all of their needs met. I don't think that's something that will ever exist. But what I would say, though, that makes this different from a traditional workplace is that I know even at a difficult moment, I know that my team has my back and they know that I have their back. And it's really this sense of solidarity and sense of commitment to a shared goal and common vision and common value that really makes the fundamental differences. Yes, like we pay people a little bit more, we have a little bit better benefit as compared to other traditional businesses in the same industry. But to me, that's peanuts compared to what the actual fundamental things that makes us different than than a traditional business. And I can tell you right now, like people who work at our company are all really, really competent. Like they can get better paying jobs somewhere else in a different industry, but they choose not to do that, partially because they believe in the work that we're doing. They believe in, not only the co-op itself, but the movement that this co-op is a part of. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's definitely the one of the biggest difference that I see.
No, that's awesome. And actually, I am remiss in not kind of like having you, really kind of describe to folks what your co-op is about, why you brought it together, what your intention was, what your goals were. Definitely want to hear more about like the co-op experience.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think it's really important for viewers to kind of like really understand in as tangible and hands-on a way as possible, like what that means to be in a co-op and why it's important. However,
Mhm.
and thank you for what you did share with us. I appreciate that very much. But yeah, please let us know, like what where did you start? Why is this co-op in existence, and what are you hoping to get out of it?
Yeah, so like I said before, one of my lifelong goals is to start more co-ops. So my wife, after we met in California, we both share similar dreams of starting more co-ops, and we basically moved to Portland, and we decided to start this new housing co-op in Portland. And it's through that housing co-op, which I still live in, and my wife lives in it along with 8 other people. It's a pretty big house of 10 bedrooms. And it's through that house that I met one of the other founder of SymbiOp. Her name is Nutmeg. And she was at that point was already running a single person landscaping businesses that focus on ecological landscaping. And as someone, just to give you a quick background, my career uh, after college, even though I had a physics degree, I actually end up going towards um, tech startup consulting, business consulting, database consulting, that kind of realm. And the reason for going into that was because I was really interested in the technology, but also thought like that might be a potential way to start a really quickly scaling co-op that way. Um, so I talk to people about their businesses a lot. I talk about how their business can grow a lot. So when I was talking to my housemate Nutmeg, it basically immediately dawned on me that this idea of ecological landscaping is such a growing industry because of the need of the planet, right? Like we're in this ecological crisis. So we need to have more and more ecological ways of land caring. And ecological landscaping is one way to do that by creating more native habitats and creating more edible food forests for humans to eat in a more local and sustainable way. So I talked to Nutmeg about her operation, and she basically didn't really do a lot of marketing. She had enough client just by posting on Nextdoor every now and then. So to me is like, wow, that's kind of a proof of concept of a good business that can easily scale. Because if we actually put some money into marketing and in actually hire a team to help Nutmeg implement these ecological landscapes, then we can have a much larger impact and get more customers and actually potentially influence the general culture of what it means to be ecological too. Because for us, like, we really, there's one reason that we rarely use the word like sustainability. We rarely use the word green, because a lot of those words have been greenwashed. So we really try to use the word ecology, because at the fundamental level, the practice that we use to create landscape and the practice that we use to create communities and businesses is a mimicry of what deep ecology is already, is how these ecosystem that has been basically sustaining for millions of years, um, through particular strategies, through particular frameworks and patterns. And those are the same patterns that we can see in really, really resilient and sustainable human systems too. So I feel like I'm kind of like going off the rail a little bit. So let me try to get back to.
No, no, no. I think that's great. I mean, like, so basically, what happened is that you were living with this person Nutmeg in a co-op, and then you
Mhm.
found out about what it was that they were doing, and then you just kind of followed up with them because you're already into co-ops. This is something that you already want to do.
Yes.
We do have a couple questions from folks in the chat, and I think it's totally consistent. These questions are totally consistent with what we're talking about,
Mhm.
which is, Rob asks, how do you make decisions in the co-op, um, and how has adding new members impacted decision making? So I think that's a great question, since I think we want to understand more about the practical applications of being in a co-op.
Yeah, so decision making is a tricky thing. So legally, right, what a worker co-op means is that every owner, like every worker, has a path to ownership, and then and that path can be defined differently by different co-ops. And then the other two requirement is that every owner has an equal share of the co-op. And then that means that equal share also means they have an equal vote at a owners meeting. And it's basically a democracy in some kind of ways. Now, after that legal definition, everything else is basically defined by each individual co-op, how they want to kind of implement that kind of democratic decision making. Because depending on how you implement it, some form might feel democratic and some form might feel less democratic, right? You have participatory democracy and then you have representative democracy. So for us, we kind of have a blend of a bunch of different things. At first, when we started with, just myself, Nutmeg, and also my wife, Lotus, like we were the original three founders. And then around the first, throughout the first year, we hired more people who were also very instrumental and become, like instrumental owners of the co-op, like Matt Gravel, Don Pisto, and also Kalila. Um, Raymond, all of those people became owners. But because we were still such a small team, we made decision more at a informal kind of way. We'll have like group text that basically, talk about small decision makings. Like, okay, what do you think we need to purchase on the truck? And then like six people will talk about it for a little bit, and then and that particular framework is through consensus decision making. I'm not sure if people are familiar with consensus, but it basically means like through a consensual processes that we uh, arrive at a decision that everybody is on board. Maybe not enthusiastically on board, but everybody is on board because they believe that even if they don't agree with that decision, it's probably a good decision for the collective. So that's consensus. Now, we have grown significantly since 2020. We now have grown from like 5 employees to about 30 something employees in 4 years of time. And we have added, the number of owners have gone from like 3 to, I think right now we're at 15 or 16 or something like that. And because of how big the team is getting, and it's only going to get bigger because we eventually we want everybody to be owners, then we can't just have every single little decision be made by consensus with like 30 or even 10 people. That will be very, very difficult, and it's going to bog everything else down. We won't actually get work done. So at that point, what would happen is we basically create different committees that are voted in by the owners, right? So we have created, essentially, we have a personnel committee that deals with personnel related things like hiring people, reviewing people, potentially firing people too. And then we have like other committees, like a finance committee that deal with finance. So like they are empowered by the owners to make certain decisions within their confined parameters, right? And we also have a safety committee. We also have, I think at some point we'll actually have to like start like a training and educational committee, and we're in the middle of like creating a liberatory practice committee which deals with diversity, equity, inclusion issues. So this is kind of like it's similar to what a sociocracy is, if people want to Google that word, and that's basically a form of a modified consensus when you have a lot more people. Then basically you want to kind of delegate different parts of the power to different committees, different groups of people, and within that group you can still make decision by consensus, and that's kind of how we do it.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, JT. I appreciate that. Definitely have my own experience and thoughts on consensus, but I think that's very cool. And I mean, it apparently it works well. I'm assuming for y'all.
Yeah, I think it works pretty well. I have also been, I've been in the co-op scene for a long time now. I have seen plenty of times when consensus fail, and to me, uh, any system is not perfect, right? There's no perfect systems, and there is, in order for something to work, you have to both have a adequately good well system, and then you have to have the culture that comes with it. Like if the people have the trust, have the cultures to work collaboratively, then consensus will work. If you have a group of people that don't trust each other and don't like to work together, then consensus is not going to work. So you might want to like default to kind of a majority rule kind of voting system. So it's totally contextual, and I certainly do not think there is a perfect system.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I do think that, once, I think things reach a certain size, a certain number of people, I think they're at that point, like there's like a critical mass up beyond which it just becomes clear, if you're being honest with yourself, that consensus really can't really be practically applied. But where that is exactly is as you say, it's contextual. So JT, I want to bring on Rob. Rob has been working with Redneck on Green. We've seen him on a couple times.
Hi, Rob.
And I know that there he is, and I know that Rob's got some questions for you and some thoughts about the co-op as well. So Rob, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, and I appreciate you being here. I'm actually right now filling in a little bit for David, dealing with tech issues, but I'm actually finishing a master's program right now where I've been focusing on worker-owned cooperatives, and I'm doing my capstone project on decision making, which is actually I was the one that added in the chat that question.
Very cool.
And I'm also very interested in the ecological landscape side of things, but before kind of bringing it back to that, I wanted to ask you about how the connection between your decision making process connects to kind of the social justice outlook of the co-op, because it seems like a lot of emphasis on co-ops. Some people are interested in co-ops because it offers a little bit better like employment, but for kind of a broader social justice movement, can you talk about how decision making plays a role in that?
Yeah, I think, the way that the reason why a lot of people join our co-op um, is because of this, equal ownership and equal level of decision making. And I think that frameworks definitely reflects on what they think about how the world, how the society should be operating in similar ways, where people's voice can be heard equally, or at least as equal as possible. um let's see, I'm trying to see how to really answer that question, because depending on who you talk to at the company, they might think about this thing a little bit differently, and I don't really want to speak for everyone. So for myself, I very much believe that um, not only is that kind of equitable practice of sharing decisions and sharing power is a value it's a value judgment, right? Not only is it a value judgment, I'm not just believing it just because. I'm also believing it because over the long run, it's actually just a more resilient way to organize a collective. Um, and there are studies that you can look into, like on like cooperation versus dominations and hierarchies and whatever else. And I'm not even saying like hierarchy is necessarily bad. I'm trying to like remove myself for even using that word, because you can argue the way that we create different committees in our co-op, now we're creating hierarchy. I personally like to say like we're actually just delegating power in different ways, and then centralizing powers based on the needs of operation, right? Um so I would say, yeah, overall my thinking in terms of social justice is not just and my thinking in terms of social justice along with my thinking in terms of our own co-op culture is not just a matter of value judgment. I actually know that it just works better over the long run.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Um, and then getting into some of the specifics of your co-op, you do regenerative landscaping, kind of. I think you talked about food forests, and we have in the United States this kind of vast suburban landscape of turf grass that is, you know, ecologically devastating due to the fertilizers that people put on it, the fossil fuels for the mowers, and and there's this kind of almost value. It is like a value system that says because I have this well-maintained grass, that's a symbol of status and a symbol of affluence, and it's kind of, I think, rooted in kind of a Victorian era type status. But um, can you talk a little bit about that attitude, and also how how do people respond to your work given that context?
Yeah, so regenerative kind of landscaping or land caring, if you want to think of it that way, versus kind of conventional way of landscaping. Um, the biggest difference is really in itself is a uh, kind of a value and perspective shift. So instead of thinking of managing a piece of land as taking control and dominating the land and do whatever you want with it. And that is, a big part of the colonial thinking, right? Is to kind of man were made to conquer nature, to control nature, right? Um, so, in contrast to that, the regenerative way of thinking, it really kind of borrows a lot from indigenous cultures of the past and current like communities where people think about nature and think about anything that's outside of themselves as a collaboration, right? It's a symbiotic relationship between you and whatever is outside of yourself. So in that way, you're not just taking control of your environment. You are at the same time trying to utilize your environment, because you do have to do that. You do have to utilize the environment to sustain yourself. But while doing that, you also want to be thinking about how to benefit the environment. So it's kind of a mutually beneficial and reciprocal relationship. So that's essentially kind of at the core of regenerative practice, regenerative thinking, is to change that mindset of like taking control of something versus being in cooperation with something. In this case, that something is nature. So specifically, the difference would be, like you said, we have conventional landscaping. There is a lawn, so we put in so much money and energy into like mowing it every single week, put in like fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, and whatever else. And every now and then might even have to rip it off and then put in new turfs in. So like we're trying to control it, right? We're trying to control exactly how it would grow and how it would look just for our benefit. Now, versus let's say I want to create a native meadow, which is some form like is more similar to a grassland, uh, that have a bunch of different species instead of just a monoculture of single species. And not only uh, that diversity of species will attract more wildlife, it's actually just more beneficial for themselves too, because now they are creating symbiotic relationship with each other that will benefit each other, instead of just one species that trying to grow and it cannot really get other nutrient from other species because there aren't other species, and it's not even attracting insects and whatever else that also help enrich the total nutrient of that ecosystem, right? So that's kind of like how we think about things differently. We generally try to, in regenerative ecological landscaping, we try to think about each landscape as its own micro ecosystem and think about how to create a community of plants that support each other, how to create a habitat that attracts animals and insects and pollinators that are native, uh, especially if they're native to the region, because oftentimes native plants and native an- animals actually have the best um, resilient strategies to survive in that kind of environment that they were already evolved to, right? So it requires less work and they're just more beneficial at the same time.
Yeah.
I just love the way that the co-op as a environment and the kind of interconnectedness of the co-op is also reflective in the philosophy that you apply to your landscaping. It's actually, it sounds very similar to me. And I was going to ask you, I have a question for you, JT. How do you think that your physics, your experience with what you've learned about physics and how you feel about it, how do you think that relates to your co-op work, and how you feel like, I'm just curious, like how that all comes together for you in your big brain?
Yeah, so on a practical level, having physics training was really helpful because I'm just generally good with numbers and creating models, business models, and operational models for our company. So that's nice, but also on a more philosophical level, and just more fundamental science level, um, there is this new kind of interdisciplinary field, which I'm sure some of you have heard of now because it's getting more and more popular, called system science or complexity science, or um, you know, it might be called something else at a different school because it's a new field. And that is something that I am incredibly nerdy about for the past few years, partially because of my physics background that allows me to really dig into the math and allows me to really kind of draw these um, parallels from, physical systems, ecological systems, human systems, computer systems, like all of those systems when they are operating in a complex and adaptive way, which generally means like they are able to act as a autonomous agent and adapt to its environment. They often exhibit very similar set of resilient features and resilient strategies that you can abstract into a framework that hopefully you can use to look at other systems that you might not have thought of before, like a social system, and really looking at it from an ecological perspective and see how you can improve it. Because at the end of the day, whatever system that we create is honestly nothing compared to ecological system. The Amazon rainforest has been around for 50 million years. That is such a long time. That's not comparable to, like capitalism has been around for like what, 400 years. That's nothing compared to that. So
You know, JT, you know what that reminds me of is are you familiar with Sapolsky? I forget his first name. The biologist. He just wrote this book called Determined. Uh,
oh, I just recently watched like a podcast. So he's something he's like very much against free will. Like he makes cases
yeah.
that like free will doesn't exist, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but one of the things that he brings up is the way that genes actually interact with the environment. Like we
Mhm.
think of genes like we've kind of like been taught that the genes that make up our DNA is just they're like a blueprint that they
Mhm.
just kind of like chunk out like this organ and that organ. And what he describes is that in fact what we've come to understand is that actually genes respond to the environment, very similar to what you're talking about with the systems thinking. It's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I find it interesting too that we kind of in agriculture and in landscaping, like conventional is kind of referred to as this also very new way of kind of destroying ecosystems, whereas these kind of indigenous practices are much longer and much more ecologically oriented. And
Mhm.
yeah, Jack already brought up the connection between the social relationship with the natural world, and then within the as cooperative, and then within your organization treating labor cooperatively. And actually, I did some of this work in New Orleans when I lived there, because flooding's a big problem,
Mhm.
and so they are into doing rain gardens and kind of creating
Mm.
integrated landscaping to help reduce the the flood runoff into the sewage system to prevent, or the drainage system to prevent flooding. And so I was wondering about going back to this kind of outlook about uh, the natural world and yards and landscaping. In your co-op, who are kind of your primary customers? Like, are they people who are already ecologically conscious and want to are they property owners who want to use their kind of parcel of land to try to build a more restorative relationship? And have you run into any limitations with people who are maybe not as open to the type of stuff that you're trying to do?
That's a great question. I would say most of our customers are leaning towards already ecologically minded people. We don't market to people who are not, so it's not very often that we encounter people who would be like, like be very angry with us because we're trying to change how they manage their land, because we don't even show our ads to them. And so now that doesn't mean we're never going to do that, because we're still at this growing stage where there are plenty of people who want to be more and more ecological, and that demographic continues to grow every single year because of, obviously, we are in a climate and ecological crisis. So I'm not really concerned about people who are against that kind of thinking, because we're not even saturating our own demographic yet. And I can even talk about more on like how to think about this in a system thinking kind of way. That's actually something that I learned in business school. Even they don't think about it in terms of ecology, but it's one of the other thing where I'm like, oh, like later on, I'm like, oh, I learned about this in business school, but now it's very similar to these other system thinkings and ecological thinking that I have encountered later on in my life. But yeah, to answer your question, we don't even think about people who are against ecological landscape right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big, I mean, I'm glad to hear that there are a lot of kind of people interested, because yeah, I think it seems like one of the easiest ways to uh, address, or in the kind of confines of our current system, to create a big change that's like that composting, and like some of
Mhm.
these other like kind of small lifestyle ways. And I was wondering, is there any policy in Portland or Oregon that you see that's promoting this work? I mean, in New Orleans, there was policy around that what they call green infrastructure
Mhm.
to deal with flooding. But is there policy around that? And if not, what do you think would be helpful in this?
Yeah, great question. Portland actually has pretty good policy, and I say pretty good because they can definitely be improved. They have been basically adding these rain gardens, like stormwater management systems on the side of the roads to reduce storm runoffs for many many years now, and they're adding more and more. Um, we just signed a contract with the city to maintain those rain gardens for the cities. We're not the only one who is doing the maintenance. It's a huge project that requires multiple contracts, but I am pretty happy that we are selected as one of the few contractors, because to us this really aligns with what we want to do, because we don't just want to serve, people who can afford to get landscapers, right? Like landscaping is not cheap. So to be able to do public projects that serves everybody, that is not only like what I want SymbiOp to do more, that's really what a lot of people at SymbiOp want to do more too, because they really, again, this aligns with our value. Another thing that the city of Portland, does pretty well is a few years ago it passed a ballot measure that essentially turned into what's called the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And what that is, it's essentially a citywide Green New Deal. It it tax like an extra 1% of the revenue of like companies that are larger than like $1 billion revenue per year, and use that money to essentially fund green infrastructures. So that could be solar panels, home retrofits, or like green landscapes in historically excluded and marginalized neighborhoods. So, like that is a really, really cool measure. I myself helped canvas along with many, many other people for that measure. And I'm actually, I sit on one of the advisory board for that particular program, city program. And it's definitely full of a bunch of really value aligned and hardworking people that are really trying to use that to start shifting city, how city kind of can run in a way that's more ecological and more equitable for the people who live there.
Yeah. And to bring it back to the workers owning the co-op, one of the things when I was doing this work was it was a very kind of conventional company in which felt like I wasn't treated with a lot of respect. I was paid a pretty low wage. And then you think about some of these policies and programs, and a lot of the Green New Deal is based on the idea of the New Deal, and there were all these agencies that came up in the New Deal era that did a lot of awesome work, but then kind of were taken away and were removed.
Mm-hmm.
Why does the worker owner model? How can the worker owner model take advantage of these policy opportunities to create long-term worker power and sustainable economic well-being?
You're asking great, great questions, by the way. This is awesome. This is like totally down in my alley. So I'm gonna talk about this particular system thinking framework to kind of use that as an analogy of why building essentially what these are community building efforts versus campaign building efforts. And you can look at like kind of the history of movement or organizing and really kind of get an idea of like these two forces kind of balance each other out or becomes imbalanced, and how that affects a particular social movements. So I'm on the camp of base building, community building. And what that means is you want to build something that's not just for a particular political campaign, for a particular specific political cause. You want to build something that is just mutually beneficial on its own, even without the politics that's around this. So that could be a housing cooperative, that could be a business cooperative, that could just be a community of people who mutually support each other through some sort of mutual aid network, right? That could be a union, whatever that is. I mean, union. If you want to really go far back, during the civil rights movement, for a lot of people, that community were Black churches, right? So these little communities, to me, are kind of the foundations of a movement. Without those things, you can like create really successful political campaigns every now and then, and those are actions that are important to push for. But if you don't have the base that sustains the action just by itself, then eventually an action, even if it's successful, it peters out, kind of like the Occupy movement. I was part of Occupy Oakland for a little bit, and I really believed in that. But because it didn't create that kind of sustainable community that would actually sustain by itself over the long run, that fuels these little campaigns, these little direct actions over time. Because you know what, like movements doesn't happen just from like a few successful actions, right? It needs to have decades of successful action and being able to be resilient to fail the actions too. And you're not going to get that unless you have a foundation of communities, of organizations that are already mutually beneficial to each other without doing any of the political actions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. That's you're speaking my language right now, and I think there's such a fruitful connection here, and I say that pun intended with the food forest. But it's such an important way to connect this issue of labor, of ecological relationships, of value chains, of what it would it be like to be able to have that direct connection of having the food that you eat being grown outside, of having the insects, having the birds and stuff. So I love talking about this stuff, but I think it's kind of at the point where we need to start wrapping up. So
yeah, we're gonna be wrapping up now. Thanks so much, Rob, for stepping in. Really appreciate that. And JT, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your perspective. I think it's been really wonderful and fascinating and very encouraging for the folks. I know that we've had some really great responses in the chat. So I was before we're gonna wrap up, I just was wanted to give you the floor to kind of like give us some last thoughts that you have on what we've talked about today before we sign off.
Yeah. Let's see. First of all, thank you for having me here. Aside from having this platform to like talk about things that I care about, it's also just really fun talking to other people who are enthusiastic about the same things that I am. That fills my cup. So it's great. I think I want to give a shout out to all of my coworkers at SymbiOp. They are such inspirations, like because I'm obviously a long-term lifelong commitment towards this movement, but every now and then um I still get deflated. I something doesn't work and I'm like, oh, is this ever gonna work? Are we ever gonna create a better world? Who knows? So like having this is where community comes in, right? Like having a community that's mutually supports each other in that kind of ways, like allow us to sustain our optimisms, allow us to continue to work and do the hard work. So again, thank all of the people who work at SymbiOp. Thank all of the people who are similar to these hardworking comrades, and in other places that I don't even know yet, and I know there are plenty of them out there. I think we're at the stage of transition from this kind of cooperative, care based, solidarity based, little communities to potentially grow into a larger networks and a larger ecosystem, and maybe even actually become its own economy at some point. So I am very, very excited to be where I am right now and kind of seeing how this emerges on its own, and play a part however I can.
JT, that is awesome. Thank you very much for kind of like sending us off on such a hopeful and positive note. That was really lovely. I really appreciate it. Folks, we are wrapping up for today's show. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jack Rabbit. I am the executive producer. Thanks to Rob for being here to help out. Thanks to everyone for being here and joining us. We're going to be back next Tuesday with Tom Nelson. He is an amazing musician, and his stuff is really great. We're looking forward to it. So I hope you can join us then. And with that, I'm going to say thanks so much and take care of yourself. Be well and fight the good fight. We'll see you next week. All right. Bye.
Thank you all. Take care.